You are Clifford in Chattanooga, aren't you?
Yes.
Okay.
Hi, Clifford.
Hello.
I'm going to have to
Let
make
me
my
handle the
question really
buttons.
I fail. I fail at button pushing. So, hello, Clifford. What's up?
Okay, my phone's dying, so I need to make a question really quick.
Okay.
I've been noticing sort of the effects of postmodernism on religion and sort of science, and you have a lot of evangelicals sort of rejecting this postmodernistic idea, but I've always seen postmodernism as a sort of way to try and justify one's belief in something regardless of evidence that there's no real objective truth and you can believe what you want to believe. But I just wanted to ask what you guys thought about postmodernism and its effects on religion as a whole and sort of the realm of science.
I am totally with you. In fact, I hear evangelists all the time railing against postmodernism, saying there's no such thing to people as truth with a capital T anymore. And that's actually a theme of Chuck Colson's book, The Faith, which I read a few years ago at his PR guy's request. And I said, it seems to me like what you are lamenting as this capital T truth, which is not respected, is the ability to believe what you want, regardless of any evidence to the contrary. I'm actually sort of as put off by some forms of postmodernism as Chuck Colson is, but I don't think that religious types are honest about what postmodernism what their faith is when it comes to, scientific inquiry requires that you actually look at the evidence and then come to a conclusion based on the evidence, not that you come to a conclusion first and then shoehorn every bit of evidence and contradiction.
Apologetics.
Yeah. Stupid apologetics.
But
Stupid people.
my view on it has always been that you have objective truths and then you have subjective opinions, and someone's subjective opinions on things is based on their own experience.
Yeah. And the thing about science is that it starts with an open acknowledgement that no matter how good we think we know stuff, our subjective opinions could always be wrong. But that doesn't mean that there's not an objective thing out there that we're investigating and learning about.
Yeah. I see a lot of POMO thinking going on among people who are not, shall we say...
How erudite.
I'm just so hip in my lingo. Among people who are not, say, religious in the traditional sense, perhaps not, say, fundamentalist Christian, but they tend to be more along the lines of the sorts of people who describe themselves as, quote-unquote, spiritual but not religious.
Yep.
Yeah.
And this seems to allow for this kind of vague floating through your philosophy and your worldview in which you don't really want to commit to things. And on the one hand, while I do think that it's certainly a dumb idea to commit to an idea and then hold fast to it whether it's right or wrong, depending on what the evidence shows, I still think at the same time there is reason to have good convictions about a particular idea if there is strong evidence to back the idea up, or if you at least can argue well for the idea. In the absence of evidence, you can at least defend your position. And this whole kind of mealy-mouthed, well, I'm okay and you're okay, and if that this is true for me and that's true for you sort of thing frustrates me no end, and I tend to see it among the non-traditional spiritualist types, the folks who are into the woo and all of that kind of thing. Not so much your church-going Christian type.
Yeah, well, in my humble opinion, both...
Why be humble on this show? We're not humble. We're arrogant.
In my arrogant opinion...
Oops, he lost us, so we'll just...
Wow, it's an epidemic of drop calls today.
It's fine. Well, he worries about that.
Sit tight, Daniel. We'll get to you next.
We'll keep answering you.
But in my arrogant opinion, both fundamentalist Christians and, spiritual but not religious Christians believe nonsense. But they justify the nonsense in two different ways. And that doesn't, and I want to emphasize every time I say something like this, that doesn't mean I think they're stupid. There are a lot of reasons why people believe in nonsense. I know very smart people who believe in nonsense. But anyway, they justify the nonsense in different ways. Your ultra super fundamentalist, like Fred Phelps, for example, will maintain his worldview by aggressively clinging to his beliefs and ignoring or shutting out, in extreme cases, like Fred Phelps and cults, any dissenting opinion, and just hiding his head in the sand.
Or, as what Fred Phelps actually does, I don't think he doesn't ignore or dismiss dissenting opinions. No, he embraces the dissent as a validation of his own worldview.
Right,
you know,
Christians will be persecuted. It was prophesied.
That whole sort of thing, right? And if they hate you, remember they hated me first, kind of thing. And so the more angrily and the bigger the crowds are who respond in defiance of his stupid little pathetic protests. I think the most recent one was at Comic-Con in San Diego, where
that was awesome.
4 pathetic little people from Westboro turned up to flash their bigoted signs, and they had an entire block on the other side of comic book geeks responding to them, which was awesome.
With their own signs.
Yeah, with their wonderfully funny signs. But, of course, the Phelpsians and the Westboro types are just going to look at that and go, see there. That validates everything we do.
They're not making fun of me because I'm full of crap.
Yes.
They're making fun of me because Jesus said we would be persecuted.
Yes.
And they can't help themselves.
That's so.
But yeah, there's that kind, and then there's the other kind who encounter reasonable opposition and just sort of back off from any testable claims and wind up with this sort of squishy, vague, well, you can't prove it's not true, kind of hypothetical, out there belief.
Yeah, I just think the wisest thing to do is be open to the possibility that you are wrong about potentially everything that you think you believe.
Which I do.
But at the same time, be prepared to defend the opinions and the beliefs you do have. And yet if the evidence comes along and shows you, well, nope, see, you're wrong, you have to just man up and say, yes, I was wrong there.
Yeah, and if you argue with somebody and you win, then you have another data point showing you might be right. And if you argue with somebody and you lose, you've learned something.
Yeah. And that's a very difficult thing that's a bit of kind of intellectual humility that a lot of people have a difficult time hanging on to, including some atheists. I had some arguments on Facebook recently with one atheist in particular who had this completely ridiculous idea, and I just went down the idea and demonstrated how ridiculous it was.
And I bet he appreciate that and thanked you for it, right?
No, she did not, actually.
Okay.
To her credit, she didn't block my comments and block me, but it was still, this difficulty in trying to get a point across. And then later on, this person was saying, oh, well, I'm always the first person to admit when I was wrong, when throughout the entire conversation she hadn't been doing that. So that kind of self-flattering dishonesty was. So people do that. Atheists are not immune. Just be aware.